My name is Abbie Spackman. I'm the project assistant and case coordinator for AgrAbility for Pennsylvanians. I grew up on my family's century farm that you can see here behind me. And I grew up raising sheep, and my family also grows certified organic vegetables, including potatoes and pie pumpkins. My background is in agriculture, and I have a degree from Penn State in agricultural extension education. And I also have experience working on my grandparents' conventional beef and grain farm in Nebraska. Agriculture is definitely my passion, and I'm excited to share with you information about the AgrAbility project and how my experiences has helped me in my interactions with the farmers we work with. AgrAbility is a project funded by the United States Department of Agriculture, National Institute of Food and Agriculture. We're a statewide project in Pennsylvania, and we provide a range of services to farmers who have disabilities or long-term health conditions. One of the services that we provide is an agricultural worksite assessment. This is really just a fancy way of saying I come and meet with you at your farm, and we do a thorough assessment of you, your farm tasks, your equipment, your farm buildings, and anything else related to your disability and farm tasks. These evaluations can last 2 to 3 hours, depending on how much equipment we have to look at and how much information we have to cover. They are informal, but yet very detailed evaluations. As I share with you today more about agricultural worksite assessments, we need to keep a few things in mind. We need to keep in mind that we are at the farm to provide an assessment for the farmer. We are in their space, and we're often asking them very personal questions about their disabilities, their limitations, and their daily lives. We also need to keep in mind safety, our safety, and the safety of those around us. If you're not familiar with a farm environment, there's a lot of potential hazards and safety considerations that you need to take into consideration and learn about. Those of you who are more familiar with farm environments may be more aware of what some of these safety concerns are, but you still need to be aware that every farm is unique. Make sure that you communicate with the farmer and those around you when it comes to biosecurity, livestock, buildings, running equipment, and other potential hazards that you may not be aware of. Also be respectful of the farm and the work sites and the farm, and understand that the farmer is working. It is a work site. It is not a petting zoo or a fun field trip. Although it can be neat to learn about each farm, you need to remember why you're there and be very respectful of their time, their space, and their feelings. Let's talk about the tools and items you should be taking with you for a worksite assessment. One of the most important things is to be prepared in the way that you dress. I always have a pair of boots with me and or boot covers. Along with that, I always make sure to dress appropriately for the weather and farm environment, and I bring along extra clothes. It's important to make sure your boots are cleaned prior to or between farm visits for biosecurity practices. I also have a good bag to take along to carry all of my tools and supplies. We're typically walking around the farm and can be on the farm for quite a long time, so it's good to be able to carry everything with you that you might need. I use an iPad for most of my note taking, and I have a digital assessment form on my iPad, but I usually bring a backup print copy and a notebook as well. You never know with technology when batteries might die or something else might go wrong, so it's good to have 2 copies of everything that you might bring digitally. I have found that my iPad is extremely helpful, and I use it on a lot of my farm assessments to take notes, to take pictures and videos, and also to show the farmers videos and pictures of assistive technology, to help them fill out applications for other referrals, and well, I'm always finding new uses for it. I always bring along a packet of information for the customer, and this is something that's custom for each individual. During the farm assessment, we go over all of the information included, and I make sure that they know where my contact information is. I did mention taking pictures with my iPad, but I always make sure that I have a camera or my iPhone with me to take additional pictures. Pictures are extremely important in documenting and providing justifications later on. I always carry a tape measure with me, which can come in handy for measuring things like tractor steps, with the width of doors, and other pieces of equipment. I highly recommend having a tape measure with you everywhere you go. There are lots of other tools that you could have, but these are kind of what I view as necessary on every assessment that I do. I also make sure to take along any forms that are needed. Again, paperwork, as I mentioned, I always have digital and print copies. And the last thing is I always recommend having a four-wheel drive vehicle. You never know what the farm road or farm environment is going to be like, and I have found myself out in all types of weather. So that's my other tool recommendation, is make sure you know what you're getting yourself into, and I suggest having a four-wheel drive vehicle. Keep in mind, you are going to a farm environment. Everyone participating in this session is going to get a copy of this agricultural worksite assessment handout. This is a handout that I provide to anyone who might be coming to the agricultural worksite assessment with me, particularly to those who do not have an agricultural background. This handout helps them to know what to expect. It provides a few tips on personal safety at the farm, which we will go over in a minute. It provides information on what to wear. It also provides additional tips for farm assessments and a little bit of information about biosecurity. These things are important for anyone who is going to be doing an agricultural worksite assessment, or for anyone who might be coming along just to observe. A few tips that I will go over right now include knowing where to meet. Our assessments usually start at the house or farm office, but farms can be a large area and you never know where a farmer might be. So it's important to determine when and where you're going to meet them and have a way to communicate with them, just in case you show up and you're only met by the farm dog. Speaking of the farm dog, you might be met by the farm dog. If this is a concern for you, be sure to contact the farmer ahead of time and ask them if they can put the dog in another location. But be aware, many farms have dogs and they very may well be the first one to greet you. If you have questions about something you see, such as a sick animal, a specific farm practice, or a safety concern, make sure that you ask the farmer or AgrAbility staff members before you assume anything one way or another. If you're not familiar with what biosecurity is, I encourage you to look up biosecurity practices, but always be sure to talk with a farmer to learn their specific preferences before you arrive. Now, let's go back to talking about safety for a minute. I'm going to share a few other tips as we go throughout this presentation related to safety, but for those of you who aren't familiar with agricultural work sites or who have no experience on a farm, you need to understand that there can be some unique hazards on the farm. Livestock aren't just fluffy pets, and haystacks aren't just something to climb on and slide down. Corn is not something to play in, and well, there's all kinds of other hazards you need to be aware of. Make sure that you educate yourself about potential hazards and speak with a farmer, especially if you're not familiar with a farm work environment. Oftentimes during farm assessments, we are around livestock. When you're around livestock, you always need to take safety precautions, especially if you're not familiar with the temperament of livestock. These two male sheep, also known as rams, seem pretty docile right now, and many might even think pretty cute. However, during breeding seasons, they can become quite aggressive, and some just have aggressive temperaments in general. So you always need to be aware of the livestock around you and use safety practices, especially if you're not familiar with a farm environment. For me, a farm assessment starts long before I ever get to the farm. Not only do I collect information from the individual over the phone or through other forms of communication before I get there, but I also work with them to build a relationship. It's important to have that relationship with the individual long before we start the assessment. When we're doing an assessment, we're often asking them very personal questions. We're often asking them to admit to weaknesses, admit to things that they're not able to do. And for farmers who can be very proud, that can be very difficult to do. So we need to make sure that we have built that relationship before we ever set foot on the farm. As I'm then approaching the farm and driving to the farm location, I start looking around. I start looking at where I'm at. What is the location, topography, and terrain of the farm? What's the farm lane like? Is it a long, bumpy driveway? Is it gravel? Is it paved? Are the farm and the home at the same location? How far is the home from the work site? These are all important factors to note and take into consideration, especially when we are working with someone who may have mobility limitations. One tool that I use both when I'm coming to the farm and leaving is if I want to take notes, I will use a voice recording app on my phone. That way I can record notes while I'm driving, safely record notes while I'm driving, and refer back to them later once I've completed the assessment. Once I arrive at the farm, I meet the farmer at the chosen location. Now, as we talked about also in safety considerations, you may be greeted by the farm dog, you may be greeted by a farm worker, you might show up and nobody's around. If the weather changed that day, their plans may have been changed. So again, it's good to make sure you have a way to communicate with the farmer if they're not there when you arrive. You also want to be really observant as you get out of your vehicle. Again, your assessment has already started. Be looking around to see what's going on the farm. Be looking around to see what equipment is around and what the environment is like so that you have a good idea of where you should start your assessment and an understanding of what you need to cover during the assessment. Every farm is unique, so observe and look around as much as you can. This is also why I suggest taking pictures and videos, because this also allows you to look back and see things later you might not have noticed when you're there. Once we get the paperwork out of the way, this is what I enjoy. In a way, I let the farmer take the lead and show me around their farm and their work site. This is when I have my iPad out taking notes and I have my camera out taking pictures. Just make sure that you have the farmer's permission to take pictures. We take a look around the farm environment, and we look at the tasks that they do. I always keep a list of all of the tasks they complete, along with the frequency the tasks are completed, the amount of time it takes for them to complete the task, the level of pain the task might cause, or other functional limitations involved. Again, farmers may not want to stop working, so this frequently takes place while I follow them around their farm, and this gives me an opportunity to see them at work, to see what they're actually able to do and not do, because what you see with your eyes can often be different than what they tell you. While we're doing a farm assessment, equipment is something important to look at. If the individual operates equipment, make sure that you look at all of the equipment that they use. Don't just take their word for it that they can access and safely use the piece of equipment. Look at it with your own eyes and see, can they actually access it? Does the tractor have good steps? Does the tractor have a good seat? What about suspension? Again, these are all things that we need to look at. Don't just take the farmer's word for the fact that, oh yeah, my tractor's great. I'm going to turn the camera around here in a minute and we're going to do a brief assessment of the tractor behind me. Assessment of equipment is going to vary depending on the individual and their functional capabilities. However, when we start looking at equipment, there's a few things that we're going to look at no matter what the individual's needs are. We're going to start by looking at the overall condition of the piece of equipment. Is it in good condition? Does it run? Does it have tires? Yes, those are things that you need to look at and ask, because I've had farmers show me tractors that they want to modify that are literally missing tires. So look at the overall condition of the tractor. Typically, the next thing I look at is access. Can they access the piece of equipment? This is often one of the biggest areas of need that we see. So we spend a lot of time talking about assessment. This is when we would look at the steps on the tractor. We would also keep in mind the individual's capabilities. Are they able to access the tractor safely and effectively with the existing steps? Are the steps ergonomically spaced? This is where the tape measure comes in handy too. What's the height from the ground to the first step? Are the steps safe and secure? And is there a handrail? Now, for some individuals, this might be more than sufficient. Other individuals may not be able to access this tractor at all. So I would take notes of the needs, making sure that I'm noting the make and model of the tractor, the condition of the tractor, and the specific accessibility needs. This might also be the point where I talk to the farmer about other options and even show them other options on my iPad. For example, if we're going to talk about a Life Essentials lift to help them with tractor access, I could show them a video of the lift in action on my iPad. Next, we're going to look inside the tractor. This is where it really helps to be familiar with equipment. First of all, does the door open? And does the door stay open on its own? This might seem like something small and insignificant, but it can be a big deal for someone who is accessing equipment at a slower pace. You don't want that door coming back and slamming them in the rear end. This can also be another place you would use your tape measure if you need to measure the width of the door for access modifications later on. Make sure that you use 3 points of contact when entering and exiting any equipment that you are assessing. Check out the condition of the seat. Is the seat in good condition? Is the suspension in good condition? And are all the adjustments in working order? One of the most common issues I see is seats in poor condition, and this can be a problem for individuals with a variety of functional limitations and disabilities. I've seen all kinds of creative solutions, and I've seen lots of seats covered with feed bags. So be sure to check out the condition of the seat and the overall condition of the operator platform or cab. You're going to want to ask the individual about operation. Can they safely operate the piece of equipment? Can they safely and ergonomically reach all of the controls? Oftentimes a farmer will say, yes, I can successfully operate that piece of equipment. But as you start asking more specific questions, you find that they might be doing some things that are, well, not so safe, like taking their hands off of the steering wheel to move one of the levers. You're only going to find this information by digging a little bit deeper and gaining experience. Be thorough with your evaluations, and when possible, ask the individual to demonstrate tasks for you, as long as that can be done safely. So again, you're going to be looking at all of the controls and the operator platform. For some individuals, you may also be looking at things like heat and air conditioning and other comfort features in the cab if they relate to their disability. We're also going to look at implements. You need to find out what implements the individual is going to be using with each piece of equipment. Are they able to independently and safely attach the equipment? Again, this is where you might need to dig deeper and find out if they can actually do it themselves and safely. Some individuals are okay with relying on others to attach implements for them. Some are not. So this is a question you need to ask as well. How often do they need to attach implements? And again, is it something that they need or want to do on their own? There are several pieces of assistive technology that can help with attaching implements, but you need to be sure to understand what implements they're going to be using and what type of attachment system is used. Is it a 3-point hitch with a PTO, like we're looking at here? These are things that you need to make notes of, and again, it can help to take pictures. Be sure that you take a look at all of the equipment that the individual uses on the farm. They may have multiple tractors that they use, and it's important to note this and to note the different features. For example, this tractor has a loader on it, and this individual is probably going to use both of these tractors, but for very different tasks. One of the reasons it's important to note the tasks each tractor is used for and the frequency of use comes into play later on when we're making recommendations. If an individual has 10 or more tractors on their farm that they use, you're going to need to start digging a little deeper because it might not be feasible to modify all of those tractors. This is when it's helpful to find out which tractors they use most, which tractors are easiest for them to access and operate, and which ones have the most features that are going to be beneficial to them. You may want to consider modifying this tractor because it has a loader on it and could perform many of the same tasks as the tractor we just looked at, in addition to many more tasks. So if we're looking at adding a lift to only one tractor, that would give us an idea that perhaps we want to modify this tractor with the lift if we're not able to modify both. But when we look at this tractor, again, just like we did for the other one, we're going to note the make and model, all of the features with the tractor, and we're going to go over accessibility and operation. Don't assume that operation is going to be the same as the tractor that we just looked at. You need to be thorough and make sure that you do an evaluation for each piece of equipment that they operate. In addition to tractors, there might be lots of other equipment on the farm, such as skid steers, combines, grain trucks, and more. Be sure to make lists and take pictures of all of these pieces of equipment. This is again where pictures can be extremely helpful when you need to go back later and look at what your recommendations are going to be. This is a traditional skid steer loader that is found on most farms. To access this type of skid steer, you have to climb around or over the bucket or attachment and then twist or turn and back down into the seat of the skid steer. And a lot of individuals find this very tricky and also report many slips and falls and other injuries while attempting to access their skid steers in this way. So a lot of times it can be very difficult to modify this in any way that is safe and successful. So for a lot of individuals, we recommend something called a side entry skid steer. This is a JCB side entry skid steer. This is something that AgrAbility commonly recommends because it is much easier and safer to access than a traditional skid steer. So you can see on this side, this is where you will access the skid steer, and this particular model does have a step, which is something important to look for because not all of them have the extra step. So we highly recommend finding one that does have that step. And then you're able to step up into the cab. The controls move out of the way while you step up into the cab. And once you're inside the cab, you can put the controls back into place. And the driving controls are here on the left side, and on the right side are the controls that operate the bucket and the boom. You do have a foot throttle on the floor, however, you can completely operate this with the hand controls. You can then move the controls up out of the way and step back out of your skid steer. We do recommend that you use the 3 points of contact when you're entering and exiting your skid steer, but with the side entry, you're not having to climb over your bucket or attachments, and many people find that it is much easier and safer to access this type of side entry skid steer. I do want to take a minute to talk to you about the current situation with COVID and social distancing. We are using social distancing practices and following other state and local guidelines when we are providing our worksite assessments. We are doing them in a safe manner, but we are currently able to provide assessments because they are agricultural related and they are needed to help the farmers remain active in agriculture. We have discussed the possibility of doing virtual worksite assessments. While these are feasible, there are many limitations. As you've seen through our videos today, a lot of these things would be very difficult to do virtually. Along with that, many farmers do not have the technology or internet capabilities to do a video call. This makes it very limiting in what we could do virtually. However, if the only way you can do a worksite assessment is virtually, it is possible to make it happen. You might have to get a little creative and think outside of the box, but it's important to the work of these farmers that we provide them with worksite assessments and safe recommendations. Just again, be aware that virtually assessing a farm is much different than doing it in person, and you might miss important information. Be very cautious if you decide to do virtual worksite assessments.